Father in heaven, we give thee thanks for this day and the many blessings that thou hast bestowed upon us. Father, we ask a special prayer for David and all the other teachers as they break the bread of life to us. Father, give them the wisdom and the recollection of the lessons that they prepared and share it with us. And Father, open our hearts to thy word and thy truths. Father, forgive us of our sins and our shortcomings and give us a home with thee in heaven. In thy Son's precious name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Billy. Okay, we're going to be starting in Esther chapter 3, verse 7. Last week, we talked a lot about different things, and I'll bring up just a short update. I don't like to do this every week because it takes a lot of time up. But one thing we talked about was how powerful this king was and what he had to take care of, the size of his kingdom and the size of his palace. I got this from Brother Artem. He sent this to me, and I thought it was pretty interesting, so I wanted to do this. The White House compared to the Palace Shushan. The Great Hall alone. Now, this is not talking about the entire palace. If you remember when they were partying, there were so many people partying and getting drunk that they had to overflow out into the area, out into the hall area. The Great Hall alone of this palace consisted of several magnificent groups of columns together with a frontage of 343 feet, 9 inches. Bottom line, 83,000 square feet was just the Great Hall alone. Our White House in Washington, D.C., the total building is 55,000 square feet. So that kind of gives you a general idea. I appreciated Chuck doing that. Visualization is good for me. I like that. One thing I want to post throughout this is what I don't want us to do is get so into so many little intricate things that we overlook the reason for the book. The reason for this book is to prove God's providence in so many people's lives during this particular time. Even though the word God is never used, the Bible is going to show so many times God's providence. And another reason for this book is to tell you about how the Jewish nation was saved from total destruction. And of course, as Jim, I think, mentioned last week, God's providence was not going to allow it to happen, but it's very interesting how it unfolds. So here's the main characters in the book of Esther, and I'll be showing this slide throughout the whole thing so you remember what we're talking about. Ahasuerus, or sometimes called Xerxes, he was the king. Vashti was the first queen that refused to appear before the drunken men and was ousted. Then he was gone for 4 years, and then we come back in chapter 2, and we read about a man by the name of Mordecai. He was the first cousin of Esther. We decided that he probably had a little bit of prominence because it said he was sitting at the gate, which is normally where your more prominent political type people would be seated, so that when the community came in, if they had something they wanted to voice, that person would be there to hear those concerns. Esther, of course, is the second queen who the book is written about, or entitled by. And then Haman was the leader of Ahasuerus. He ended up saying that he was so powerful he became the chief of all of his servants. So he had a lot of power. Some people think he may have been the second in power at this time. And he hated Mordecai because Mordecai refused to do what? Bow to him. He just refused to do so. And then Hathach was the chamberlain appointed to take care of Esther by the king. If you remember, he's the one that showed extra favoritism to her and made sure she kind of got moved up in line when all these women were going to go and see the king to find out which would be chosen. Haman also is known as the Agagite. He's the main antagonist in the book of Esther. He was a highly ranking official. He was promoted above all princes, as I said, and some people think he was the second most powerful person in the court of Persia at that time. With that, bigger they are, the harder they fall. Exactly. Okay, let's read verses 7 through 11. We discussed a little bit this last week, but I want to kind of have a good place to start.
In the first month, which is the month Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, that is the lot, was cast before Haman from day to day and from month to month until the 12th month, that is the month Adar. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, "There is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of all other people, and they do not observe the king's laws. So it is not in the king's interest to let them remain. If it is pleasing to the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who carry on the king's business to put into the king's treasuries." Then the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, "The silver is yours, and the people also, to do with them as you please."
What I think is really interesting is the fact that this man Haman, we've already said he had a position of power. He must have, because he had not even gotten permission from the king at this point to even do what he did. They were casting throwing dice or something of chance to find out when the actual day would be that they would annihilate these people. It's really interesting. They picked a particular date, and they were going to kill them all in one day. That was the plan. We also need to bear in mind that Haman never mentioned to the king anything about it being a nation. He said, "There are certain people out here that are violating your rules. They're not showing the respect that they should." And based on what he told the king, of course, is when he decided he would move forward. He said, "I'll even pay my own money to get it done." The signet ring was used to endorse and agree with what Haman wanted to do. And by handing over the ring, he agreed to have these certain people wiped out. But in verse 11, we find out that the king agreed to fund this out of the treasury. Why would the treasury be low right now? Been in Greece for how long? 4 years. Did you have something, Jim? Yeah, please.
I was going to bring out again, I keep harping on this same thing, the providence of God. If you go back, I bring this up before with Joseph and the providence of God there. Remember the Israelites, if you will, they weren't Israelites at that time, when Joseph went into Egypt, they had a very high standing at the start. And then by the time they were driven out of Egypt to go to the wilderness, the Pharaoh that was in charge at that time no longer had the same regard for the Israelite nation. The same thing's taken here. The Babylonian captivity went in and took Judah to the captivity a few years before this. And now, here these people, like you said, that are the new nation, the Medes and Persians and everything, they don't remember, evidently, where these people came from, that they were captives, and now they don't live under our laws. They don't respect us anymore. So, again, they're trying to get rid of them again. But we know, we'll see here that they're not able to do that due to God's providence again.
Right. Okay. Very good. Good history information. Verses 12 through 15. Brian?
Then the king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and it was written just as Haman commanded to the king's satraps, to the governors who were over each province, and to the princes of each people, each province according to its script, each people according to its language, being written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's signet ring. And letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews, both young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to seize their possessions as plunder. A copy of the edict to be issued as law in every province was published to all the peoples, so that they should be ready for this day. The couriers went out, impelled by the king's command, while the decree was issued in Susa the capital. And while the king and Haman sat down to drink, the city of Susa was in confusion.
Now remember, at this time, they didn't have email, they didn't have U.S. mail, some people call it snail mail. They didn't have any way of getting the information out except for one way, and that was with couriers. How many provinces we say that there were? You remember that? We compared that to 127. And guess what? They didn't all speak the same language. So they had a big job to do. They had to get all this information out to all these 127 provinces. We assumed that, I don't know, we know we were talking about geographically. It was a huge area, if you remember. We showed a map of that about, I think, probably the first week. So it was a big job that they had to do. And they threw the pur on the 13th day of the first month, and then the pur, or the whatever it was, however they read it, said that the destruction of these people would come on the 12th month. So I find it really interesting also to know that it was a year in advance. And it was a public knowledge. It wasn't like it was a secret. So at this point, these people that were certain people, I kind of get a little confused about this, because if they didn't know that they were Jews at this point that were being destroyed, how did they know who to send the couriers out to? They went to everybody, of course, but if anybody has any thought on that, then feel free to speak up. It's unbelievable. Raise your hand if you would. It's unbelievable that that it was a public nature. So the Persians were ready to kill, and the Jews would have to be ready to die. That's what it boiled down to. Imagine the dread and the weight if you were a Jew at this time. And we've already talked about this once, and I don't want to run it in the ground, but it's so hard for us to put our feet in other people's shoes, isn't it? It is. I can't imagine being a Jew during World War II and being a person that was being held and ready to be put to death, knowing that they were going to be put to death. These people had a whole year to think about it. There's no good thing about what happened in World War II. At least the timing wasn't. They didn't have that long to sit and wonder and ponder how they were going to die. Yes, Jim?
You'll say it was strictly because of Haman. He hated Mordecai that much. And of course, when he got the authority to do it, he didn't tell the king that that's what he was going to do as far as those people being Jews. He just said that they were different and they didn't follow our laws. But he's the one was given the charge, yeah, go ahead and do this, because we don't want, he was actually willing to pay for it, but the king said, no, we can pay it out of the treasury. And he gave gave Haman the authority to do it. So he was the one that then was able to name the people as being Jews.
Correct. Very good. Well, I'm sorry, my mind went sideways. What was the last thing you said, Jim? Do you remember? You had to get the mic back. He's right behind you. My apologies.
I said when Haman gave the order to do this, that's when he named the Jews, not to the king, but with this order of going to kill all these people.
Okay. But to the king, he never said that. I wonder at that point if the king knew. I guess he would have known. We don't know. That's a good point. Probably didn't care with the cruel type person he was. The posts were going to be simple. The messengers sent out. They left quickly to get the word out. And then after this was done, what did Haman get? What did he do? He sat down and got him a drink. Sat down to drink. Had no regrets. Why was it, though, that Shushan was perplexed? from what I understand, what I can read, the reason it says in verse 15 that the people of Shushan were perplexed is, why should an entire nation be wiped out due to one man's disobedience? And also, although the Jews had enemies in this area, most of the Persians were likely to possibly sympathize with the Jews because some national groups in Persia might have thought, who's next? Remember, there's a conglomeration of people that were there. So if this one man has the power to wipe out a whole Jewish nation, what about our nation? What would happen to us? The evil of Haman is reflected in that he would destroy possibly up to probably 1 million people because of his hatred of one man and his foolish pride. And that man's name that he hated was who? Mordecai. Okay. Any comments through chapter 3? Okay. Chapter 4. This chapter definitely exhibits the sadness, the alarm, the mourning, and the fear of the people that are going to be destroyed. Verses 1 through 3, Brian.
When Mordecai learned all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city and wailed loudly and bitterly. And he went as far as the king's gate, for no one was to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. And in each and every province where the command and decree of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing, and many lay on sackcloth and ashes.
Okay, again, I use this terminology. I apologize a lot. Put your feet in Mordecai's shoes. Do you think he has any regret at all that he did not bow? Because now the whole nation, because of what he chose not to do, that he loved and was a part of, was going to be totally destroyed. I just wonder if there was any guilt that Mordecai had. He was a normal human being. I don't know. I've often, I kind of wonder about that. He obviously was very saddened. I don't know if the guilt is the right word, because it said that he put on sackcloth and ashes. And normally during that time, a person either put on sackcloth or ashes. But to show tremendous grief, they would do both. And he did both. That meant he was in the most distressing grief that would be possible. And then he even went to the king's gate. Why would he go to the king's gate? So he could be seen, and hopefully, possibly, I think maybe, so that Esther might know what's going on as well, and she did find out. Any comments? 4 through 8, Brian.
Then Esther's maidens and her eunuchs came and told her, and the queen writhed in great anguish. And she sent garments to clothe Mordecai, that he might remove his sackcloth from him, but he did not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hathach from the king's eunuchs, whom the king had appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what this was and why it was. So Hathach went out to Mordecai to the city square in front of the king's gate, and Mordecai told him all that happened to him, and the exact amount of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews, and also gave him a copy of the text of the edict which had been issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show Esther and inform her, and to order her to go in to the king to implore his favor and to plead with him for her people.
So we have to assume that up to this point, I don't know how long it's been since the petitions have gone out, but we have to assume up to this point that she had been isolated from this and didn't know about it until now. When her servants told her this, she was, of course, very sorrowful. She loved Mordecai. Who was Mordecai to her relation-wise? First what? First cousin. But what did he do? He kind of basically raised her. Kind of reminds me of Abraham and Lot. He raised her, so she was like a child to him. So now she's seeing someone that she really trusts. Obviously, Hathach. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but she sent him out to talk to Mordecai to find out what was going on. And he actually told everything that he needed to tell this servant to go back and talk to Esther. Not only did he tell him, he also did what? Yeah, he gave him a copy. He actually had a copy of the decree that was given out by these, in all these 127 provinces, to prove that this is the case. Mordecai told Esther to go into the king to plead on her people's behalf. This is the first time we have the opportunity to see where Mordecai is now, he was before telling her what not to do. What did he say don't do? Don't tell anybody you're a Jew, because he knew how they'd be treated. But now, under this circumstances, now he's saying, please, go before your king. Your entire nation is going to be wiped out, and you may be the person that can stop it. You need to go before the king. And then we're going to talk about why that was a hard thing to do. So now this servant would know that she was indeed a Jew. And so obviously she really trusted him, didn't she? She had to have trusted him. Because at that point, if he had expressed to the king, it might have put a few feathers in his hat. That he could have gone to and say, you realize that your queen's a Jew. But at this point, he must have trusted him because it was not known. Any comments through verse 8? 9 through 12, Brian.
And Hathach came back and related Mordecai's words to Esther. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and ordered him to reply to Mordecai, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that for any man or woman who comes to the king to the inner court who is not summoned, he has but one law, that he be put to death, unless the king holds out to him the golden scepter so that he may live. And I have not been summoned to come to the king for these 30 days. And they related Esther's words to Mordecai.
So now the servant is carrying out the request of Mordecai to go and plead to Esther for some help. And what does she do? Whoa, wait a minute. You're putting my life in danger because I can't appear before this king. Read that for me, Brian. Can you read that from there?
Yeah. The attached photo shows the father of Ahasuerus, Darius the Great, seated on his throne. In his right hand, he grips his golden scepter, which is quite slim and unornamented. There can be little doubt that it was just such a scepter, and perhaps the very one represented here, that Ahasuerus held out to Queen Esther. This depiction of Darius comes from his palace at Persepolis. Although not shown on this photo, his son and crowned Prince Xerxes, Ahasuerus, is standing directly behind him. The carved relief has since been removed to the National Archaeological Museum in Tehran, Iran, which is where it was photographed.
Gives you just a little bit better depiction of what this scepter looked like. Hold on. Let me get it down here. Yeah, okay. The point I want to make once again is how important history is to our faith and how important it is that we transfer this information to younger folks and let them see that history will point out things that are found in the Bible. We know that from history, that also that Ahasuerus was a very moody person, and he did throw temper tantrums at will. So she also assumed that, or knew that. And what did it say? Another reason she was a little concerned. What had he not done? He had not called for her what? 30 days. He said, she said, he hasn't even called for me in 30 days. So there was a concern on her part how she would be accepted. 13 through 17.
Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this?" Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "Go, assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens also will fast in the same way. And thus I will go in to the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went away and did just as Esther had commanded him.
So now we find that Hathach has brought back to Esther the reply from Mordecai. And what was his reply, basically, in a nutshell? It was God's will. What else? But what did he say? You're not going to escape anyway. Don't hide behind the title of a queen, because it's going to be found out that you're a Jew. So you're either going to die by going before the king and him not raising that scepter and you being killed immediately, or you're going to be killed on the 13th day of the 12th month anyway. So regardless, you're going to be killed. But he's saying, don't hide behind the security of the king's palace. You're a Jew, so act like it. Isn't that what he's saying? It's now it's time to go ahead and let people know. Mordecai shows faith in the promise by God to Abraham and basically says that if Esther does not accept her responsibility, God would just use another way. It's pretty impressive, I think, about Mordecai right now. Why? Why am I saying that? What do we find out about Mordecai right here? He trusted God. He knew that those people would not be totally wiped out. God would make a plan. If she chose not to help, then God would find a way, which I think is really interesting. Verse 15 was a really strong response from Esther. She said, okay. She said, all the Jews in Shushan and herself and her maidens would do what? They'd fast for 3 days. And then during fasting, what would always take place during that time? Prayer. And then she said, I'll go in, and if I die, I die. Okay. Any comments? We're moving right along. Mike Weeks may have to come back up here quicker than I thought. Chapter 5, verse 1, please.
Now it came about on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace in front of the king's rooms. And the king was sitting on his royal throne in the throne room, opposite the entrance to the palace.
Okay, now the fast is over. She's done fasting and prayed for 3 days. It appears that on the surface, we're going to find out a little bit different, but we find out that she's prepared mentally and spiritually to follow through with her commitment to her people. What emotions, this is kind of a rhetorical question, but I'll ask anyway, what emotions was she feeling right now? Real loud, Jeff. Worried. What else? That's it. I think even more so fear. Fear. Even though that was her husband and the king, and obviously maybe they'd had a good relationship, it appeared, even though they hadn't seen her in 30 days. She's prepared mentally. She put on her best. Unlike the natural beauty she showed when she was first called to meet the king prior to being named his queen, there's a different type, I'm sure, of adorning at this time. At this point, there'd be only one of two results. She would either be put to death or she'd be forgiven by the king for her unnecessary intrusion without getting permission. So what could she hope that he would do with that scepter? Extend it. Exactly right. Okay. Verses 2 and 3, please.
And it happened when the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, she obtained favor in his sight. And the king extended to Esther the golden scepter which was in his hand. So Esther came near and touched the top of the scepter. Then the king said to her, "What is troubling you, Queen Esther?" And what is your request? Even to half of the kingdom it will be given to you.
So now what emotion would she have? Yeah, that's exactly what I wrote, relief. Relief that she's not going to be murdered. I find it really interesting, too, is the response that the king had. You know, evidently she didn't say, I have a question to ask you. He just assumed by her coming before that she must have had a really important petition to ask about him. And so before she even asked, what was his response? I'll give you up to half of the kingdom if you request it. That must have made her feel a lot more confident. Don't you think? I would think that would make her feel a lot more confident. He also had her, he had to have known that she was appearing about something very important, or she would not have risked death to have done so. 4 and 5, Brian.
And Esther said, if it please the king, may the king and Haman come this day to the banquet that I have prepared for him. Then the king said, bring Haman quickly that we may do as Esther desires. So the king and Haman came to the banquet which Esther had prepared.
Can't help but smile and thinking about what Haman must have been thinking right now. Wow, look at me. I'm going to a banquet, and guess who's coming? Just the king and the queen and me. So he had to have felt pretty good about himself at this point, didn't he? Had no clue what was going to end up happening. The invitation is given to the king and Haman to come for a feast, and of course it's accepted. And at this time, Haman, he really must feel like he's got it all. He's invited to dine with the royal couple alone, appears. Verses 6 through 8, Brian.
And as they drank their wine at the banquet, the king said to Esther, what is your petition? For it shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Even to half the kingdom it shall be done. So Esther answered and said, my petition and my request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my petition and do what I request, may the king and Haman come to the banquet which I shall prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king says.
I think we see now a little bit of hesitation on her part, because she did not at this time reveal to the king what she wanted. What she said is, here's my request. I want you to come back again tomorrow, and let's have a banquet again with Haman. Somebody said something. Let me get a mic to you. Raise your hand. Hold on just a minute, Dan. Let me get a mic to you. Just 1 second. I didn't hear you, though.
I can see how you could interpret it as hesitation, but I always thought it was more planning and cunning, knowing that this culture that we don't understand, seems like she kind of knew how to play this the right way.
Okay. Very good. Thanks, Dan. He repeats his statement again, though, about what he'd do for her. What was that? I'll give you half the kingdom. Appears he really does, seems to love and respect her, at least at this point. She requests again that they return for a second banquet, and that seemed to please the king. And at that time, she would do what? She would reveal her request. I just threw this up here. Why the delay by Esther? After Dan made this comment, I think that could have been added as well. Was it planning? Did she lose the courage to ask? Did she need more time to pray? And was this just God's providence? And it could be obviously all of those, or plus added what Dan said, or any of those. But I think that's why we see the delay. Yes, Jeff?
I was thinking she might want to talk to Mordecai. You know, when she first went in there and she wasn't sure she was going to make it or not. And when the king recognized her, she thought, okay, I've got my turn. Let's have this banquet, you know, and because she didn't know what was going to happen to her, you know. And so then anyway, she may have needed a little more time to consult with Mordecai to say, okay, I've got this banquet set up for tomorrow. What should I do, or can you help me?
Okay.
That's without reading ahead to see.
I'm wondering at this point, at what point did the people that received the petition know that it was a Jewish race? Because the petition said a certain people. I wondered about that. Yes, Bill.
I've wondered, because you mentioned putting your feet in people's shoes, and I thought the empire is pretty vast. It's a big empire. And I often thought about, what if you were some person in some remote or part of the empire, not so close to where we are here, and all of a sudden, one day, the soldiers just start killing all the Jews, and you'd have to be wondering what happened. You know, they may not know what Mordecai did and what the order was and all of that kind of stuff. It just, all of a sudden, the soldiers just show up and start arresting them and killing them. And I thought, trying to put myself into that position, I wonder what those people thought.
Yeah. I also wonder if they had 12 months, if I were a father and had a family, I'd be looking for a place to hide too. That's another thing.
Well, I was thinking that, and I thought, like in our case here, what if an order went out, I want you to kill all the members of the Church of Christ across the country on a particular day? As big as our country is, where would we go? Right? I mean, if you say, well, I'm gonna go down to Georgia or something. Well, they're killing them down in Georgia too, right? And I thought, unless you have the means to leave the country, and you know, permanently, which that is its own process, you're kind of stuck in a real vast, like the United States is, or especially as large as that empire is. Where would you go? And would you have enough time to get out? You know, that kind of thing. I was wondering that too.
That's a good point. Yes, ma'am.
I think there was some information in the order, because we've already read that the Jews were upset about knowing what's going to happen to them. So I just assumed that it was, something was said so that knew which people.
Okay, on the petition. Yeah. Okay. Yes, Charlie?
Mordecai was not just an outsider. He had contacts within the royal circle. That's how he got Esther. That's how he knew that the king was looking for a new queen. So that's how he got her in the quote-unquote contest. That's how he was able to go to the King's Gate, because the King's Gate would have been inside 2 or 3 other walls, because that was the king's private entrance. So it was guarded to a certain point. So he was able to get to the King's Gate. He was not unknown to members of the royal circle. He probably was very likely able to figure out from the gossip inside, because Haman couldn't keep his mouth shut. He loved to brag about himself and his plans. He shot his mouth off, and it got around, and the story got around to Mordecai. He was like, oh man, he's after us.
Okay. Any other comments? Thank you for your comments. Anybody else? Let's see, I believe we're ready for 9 and 10. Is that right, Brian? Verses 9 and 10.
Then Haman went out that day glad and pleased of heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, and that he did not stand up or tremble before him, Haman was filled with anger against Mordecai. Haman controlled himself, however, went to his house, and sent for his friends and his wife Zeresh.
Well, he had every reason in the world to be joyful and full of foolish pride, didn't he? He was going to spend 2 days back to back with the king and the queen. What I think is really humorous, and again, the Bible's so great about this, pointing out every little detail. What's the detail that we should find humorous in the next verse, in verse 10? Read that again, Brian. Read that again, Brian, verse 10.
Verse 10.
Yes.
Haman controlled himself, however, went to his house, and sent for his friends and his wife Zeresh.
I'm sorry, back up to 9.
Oh, sorry. Then Haman went out that day glad and pleased of heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, and that he did not stand up or tremble before him, Haman was filled with anger against Mordecai.
Jim.
You be careful what your intent is toward your fellow man, 'cause otherwise you'll be the one to reap the.
Okay.
demise instead of him.
What I find really humorous, though, is it says that not only did not bow, to me, it almost sounds like he didn't get out of his way. Certainly didn't make an abrupt move to get out of Haman's way. He refrained himself at this point. I'm talking about Haman, and he just continued to gloat over his perceived good fortunes that he had. With his family and now his friends invited over, he had plenty to brag about. He invited his friends, his family, just like us today. Sometimes we're guilty of doing the same thing, aren't we? But certainly not for this type of reason, of course. But he was there to tell his family and friends, guess what I'm doing tomorrow? I just left the palace. I'm going back tomorrow. Jim.
Round two.
Round two.
I wondered about when it said that Mordecai did not stand. That was one thing, and I think that word was or tremble. I think that was the other word that made Haman angry. That he didn't create fear in Mordecai. That kind of thing. And I thought that's how selfish or arrogant or whatever word you want to use, that as I walk by, people don't tremble at my presence. That's really, I thought that was interesting. I can understand the standing because that's kind of a respectful thing, but the trembling, I thought that's interesting, that he got angry that Mordecai didn't tremble at his presence.
Yeah, that is very interesting. Let's read, you know what, we've only got a couple of minutes. I don't think we'll be able to get through the rest of the chapter. So if it's okay, let's pick up next week. If you're making notes, chapter 5, we'll start at verse 11 and finish up 5. And I don't know how many chapters we'll finish up, but we'll keep rocking along. Thank you for your comments.